All right, so we're going to continue on with 8.6, which deals with speciation. So remember what a species is. So a species is a group of similar organisms that are able to reproduce to make fertile offspring. Key word there, or words rather, there being to make fertile offspring. So their offspring must be able to reproduce themselves. And then again, the definition of speciation is the formation of a new species. Allopatric speciation, breaking the word down, allo means different, patric means homeland. And so this is when members of the same species become isolated for whatever reason from one another, which is going to lead to speciation. This can happen, as you see in the picture here, as a new say river is formed over time. Something is causing a population to become split, and they're isolated from one another, and they will begin to drift away from one another as far as traits are concerned. Sympatric speciation, sim means together, patric again is homeland. And so this is when members of one species are not reproducing, yet continue to live in the same area rather than being separated by geography. They're separated by other factors. So maybe for whatever reason, a particular type of fish is unable to reproduce with another type of fish in that area, but they're both fish types. So reproductive barriers are typically prezygotic barriers, and these are factors that prohibit successful reproduction by keeping individuals separated. Again, a zygote is a fertilized egg, which is the result of the joining of the sperm, which is the male gamete, and the egg, which is the female gamete. A post-zygotic barrier can be possible, and these factors prohibit successful reproduction after fertilization has occurred. So reproductive isolation is the separation of a species so they can no longer reproduce fertile offspring. Maybe it's a different type or different time that these organisms hunt or are active, or the climate in which they are active, the type of environment that they're in. There's a lot of different things. So with reproductive isolation, you can have temporal isolation, which is a form of prezygotic. The groups become isolated because they reproduce at different times of the day or different times of the year. So, for example, some frogs reproduce during the day and other types of frogs reproduce at night. So the ones that reproduce during the day will never reproduce with the ones that reproduce at night, and vice versa. Elk reproduce in early fall, and white-tailed deer reproduce in early winter. So these two different organisms reproduce at different times of the year, which is going to keep them from being able to reproduce with each other. You also have habitat isolation. So groups become isolated because they live in different habitats. An example is some snakes spend a majority of their time in the water, and others spend a majority of their time on land, and they're not going to typically run into one another, so they will not reproduce with each other. Could have behavioral isolations. So groups become isolated because they develop different behaviors associated with reproduction or the selection of mates. So example, frogs have different calls in order to attract their mates. So the female frogs know which calls they're looking for. Another example is the blue-footed boobies have different dances in order to attract their mates, and these dances do not attract other organisms or other birds. So in an innate behavior, these are behaviors that you're born with. They are coded for in your DNA. An example is kittens nursing from their mother and huddling to stay warm. Courtship dances are another example. They're just ingrained in the organism. If these behaviors change, speciation may occur. Then you have learned behaviors. So a cat learning to turn the water on to get a drink is an example of a learned behavior. Migration is an example that has components that are both learned and are innate behaviors. So organisms that migrate understand and have the urge, so to speak, to migrate, but the young ones do have to be shown how to migrate and where to go. So it's a mix of both um, innate and learned behaviors. So another one is geographic isolation. The groups becomes isolated because of geography, say islands or mountain. Examples are the Hawaiian finches were isolated from one another as new islands are formed and as volcanoes erupted, and then we start to see variations within the species of finches in the Hawaiian Islands. So the post-zygotic example is hybrid sterility. These groups become isolated because their offspring cannot reproduce or create fertile offspring. An example is the zonkey. The zonkey is a cross between the closer related species, the zebra and the donkey. The hybrid is sterile, meaning that it cannot reproduce, so the zebra and the donkey remain separate species. And that is the end of 8.6. So be sure you complete the form with this. And if you have questions, let me know. Thank you.